the only people that are going to listen to this, watch this, that we're typically in the room with are leaders of leaders. Okay, and what were you saying when you did this? Is that part of your answer to my question?
Yes.
All right, this is going to be good. It's going to help somebody, man. It's going to help somebody. It's helping me.
I love that.
All right.
Yeah, we met in 2012 because you were in that first Conscious Capitalism, the first time I showed up to Conscious Capitalism.
Right.
Very soon thereafter, you connected with me and you said, we've got to bring you into Maddox Douglas. And
yeah, no, so here's how it went. So you were at the Conscious Capitalism Summit doing your thing, and you at one point you did the whole brain thing, and you talked about the OODA loop. And in the process, I'm sitting there going, he's talking about the Maddox Douglas mind to market innovation process.
Yeah.
He's mirroring, design thinking, like he's speaking my language.
Yeah,
and before I reached out to you to bring you into Maddox Douglas, I had gone home that weekend and signed up for your Going for a Framework online program back in 2012.
Yes.
Remember? And in the process, as I would go through each chapter, I'm doing all my notes and I'm tracking each chapter and each page, and I'm doing all the work, and I'm sending you emails going, here's what I thought about that first chapter. Here's what I didn't understand.
Yeah.
Beating the crap out of your beautiful content, not to
I love it.
But to understand it, right? I was trying to chew on it and process it, and you were super generous to entertain the emails and whatever. Like, I got so used to your accent and everything else that I was like, I don't know this. This guy's like my brother. He's been a part of my life for a long time. And so then it was, holy cow, the process has unlocked some things for me. And now remember, this was about 4 years after I had done my 52-week learning cycle with the Stegan Integral Leadership Academy in Dallas. So I had been through a process to try and help me with my vertical development. I got you in your 8-week program, and it gave me new leverage and new access to things. So I was like, okay, this guy, I need him to come to Maddox Douglas and share this with everybody. And so we started a process together inside of the innovation firm to really help do that and build the capabilities inside our firm. And remember, I started giving your program to clients. I started giving your program. This was the most significant part to me. I thought it was so important, like, not just for me, but it was like one of those things, like, oh my God, this is a gift that I can pass on to people. So I gave it to my twin brother and my older brother. And when I gave it to them, I said, hey, this is the best gift I can give you next to giving you a kidney. That's where I'm coming from, man. This conversation, I hope, brings some of that to some other folks.
Well, right. First of all, that's the greatest testimonial that I've ever received. Okay. The power of this, in coaching, when I begin a coaching process with clients, I look at, what is the greatest predictor of success? What is the greatest predictor of success? And it's actually not me. It's actually, the way the individual orients into the process, with openness, kindness, curiosity, presence, and being on purpose. And so what was just like, what is so rich, what I loved about what you're a voracious learner. You're a voracious learner, and, with insatiable curiosity. And that is just such a joy to be around. And actually what it does is it actually co-evolves the content, because the questions that you ask are faithful, and it actually engages the content to actually co-evolve the content.
Well, I hope so. And it was a great initial treasure hunt that has spanned many years now. All right. So Leading well from within. Definitely, or presumably, more important now than ever.
Yeah, yeah. As I reflected on leadership more and more, I realized that it begins as an inside job. So if we fundamentally want to lead well in the world, the first place we need to know how to lead is how do we lead well inside ourselves? And, the subtitle of the book is, it's this really fundamental, it's a science and practice of conscious leadership. And we can share more about what that means. But ultimately, there's an awakening. How do we fundamentally learn how to navigate internally stress, uncertainty, and self-doubt, particularly in times of great challenge and internal unrest, to be able to elevate and lead from our highest selves? How do we do that? And the premise and the value of doing that is, as we look how to lead from our best selves, that puts us in the best possible position to actually ultimately to elevate others around us, to be a part of elevating humanity, to be a part of contributing. So you claim your own growth first so that you can be in support of elevating and being in service of others around you.
There's quite a ripple effect from the individual to the team to the organization and even to the generations of leaders that are affected by the individual who's putting their mask on first and doing their inner work, right?
So I love what you're sharing here, Raf, because what you're talking about is gets at the heart of the definition of leadership. The heart of the definition of leadership is that leadership is an act of influence. Leadership is an act of influence. And then when we talk about conscious leadership, I just want to kind of because you might say, well, maybe, there are leaders that lead with positive influence, and then there are leaders that lead with negative influence, right? Are we over here in service of something larger than themselves that are tied to universal values? Or are we leading for the sake of our own personal power? And to reflect on where is our influence, where are we drawing our influence on? Then the next piece of this is to understand that we're going to get into some of the neuroscience. I'm very happy to share some of the neuroscience, but we are fundamentally wired to connect. We are fundamentally wired to connect. So you cannot not have influence. You cannot not have influence. And the only question is, are you having positive influence on your environment and you're having negative influence on the environment? And by the way, leadership's not a role. So when you think about the areas of your life that you have influence, it's not only at work. It's at home with our families. It's in our social circle. It's in our communities. It's in our quiet conversations where we think nobody can hear us, right? So leadership is an act of influence, and we cannot not have influence, and leadership's not a role, it's a way of being. And so if we ask ourselves the question, are we having positive influence or having negative influence? There's a myth of leadership development, because you already have influence. You already have influence. And you're asking, am I having, with a mindful awareness in conscious leadership, am I having positive influence, having negative influence? So leadership is not an act of becoming a leader. It's an act of awakening to the leader you already are. It's an act of awakening. Conscious leadership is an act of awakening to a deeper level of introspection, leading well from within, to mindful awareness of how am I showing up now in a way that's inevitably having influence with everyone around me.
And influence in a way that's congruent with what I think matters most, where the purpose, values, impact on others, and does it align with and contribute to elevating humanity, or whatever portion we think we're elevating in the context of humanity, right?
Yeah. So when you talk about leading well from within, we spoke about how it's about navigating stress, uncertainty, and self-doubt, so you can actually orient in terms of what matters most. What matters most in the ability for you to elevate yourself in the alignment of your purpose, and what matters most to be able to elevate and serve others. And so what's really challenging is when you get into very demanding, very challenging environments, it can literally feel like you're losing your mind and you're losing your perspective. And you're actually going down into a really reactive state around the triggers, the demands, where you're feeling tremendous amount of stress or self-doubt, and we're going down the rabbit hole into our low performance leadership states. And so the question is, how do we cultivate the awareness, the skills, and the practice for elevation?
The stress that comes with the multi dimensions of change happening all at once on the economic level, on the health level, on the environmental level, on the relational level, on the the social level, all of those things happening at the same time, and on top of the fact that we have stuff to do every single day.
Right.
Like it's
yeah.
With these big waves of change, these big waves of disruption.
Yes.
Some we saw coming, some we didn't want to believe that it would rear its head again after many years. We thought it was fixed, and here it is again, but deeper and more complex. And so so kind of understandable that we could be reactive.
Yes.
Understandable that we could be stressed out, burnt out, whatever, and yet we still have the responsibility to lead. Most people aren't choosing to do it negative. Most people aren't choosing to be counterproductive or choosing to do things that are against what they believe in. But with the reactivity happening, then what? With the reactivity happening, we can't even be sure
we get swept away.
Yeah.
We get swept away.
Part of your magic is being able to distill the neuroscience in a way that it's useful.
Yeah, indeed. And what I love about the neuroscience is in this field of disorientation, it can give us a roadmap. So if we know how our brain works, we can know how to better work our brain. We can see things a little bit more clearly. But it's also an act of compassion, because sometimes when we're deep in the grips of our own self-doubt or shame, we can feel like we're fatally flawed. And if we understand, in many ways, this is kind of how our brain works under situations of high demands and strained resources, we can find greater compassion for ourselves, and we can find greater compassion for others. So we know we're not alone. We know we're not alone. One of the things that I did in Leading Well from Within, that I really anchored it in neuroscience. First of all, neuroscience, and then mindfulness practice. But the neuroscience, I wanted to really understand the field of neuroscience is vast. So I wanted to look for, what were the simple and powerful patterns that can give us some clarity, give us kind of like very pragmatic, ability to actually understand what's going on and give us some footholds for meaningful skills and practices that can shift us. And so there are a number of ways of architecting, an understanding of the brain. And this is my attempt to draw a brain. And I'm also showing a hand model of the brain, where the brain develops from the bottom up and the back forward. And so this construct I'm about to share is a construct put forth by Paul MacLean at the National Institute of Mental Health in the 1960s, and it's called the Triune brain model. It means there are three major parts of the brain in its evolutionary evolution. So the base of the brain over here is the brain stem, which is focused intensely on safety and survival. Then you've got the middle part of the brain, second part of the triune brain over here. It's called the paleomammalian brain, also known as, there's a collection of systems known as the limbic system. And this has a number of functions, including, you know, it's essentially giving rise to love and belonging, you know, our capacity for nurturing and pair bonding behaviors. So this is, you know, sometimes people call this the seat of emotions. And then you've got in many ways, these are subconscious arenas. And then you've got this function, the neocortex at the top. Third part of the triune brain is the neocortex. And you've got this part of the brain behind the forehead, which is the prefrontal cortex. It's the newest in evolution and the most evolved part of evolution, and that conveys wisdom. And so essentially what happens is the brain essentially maps against Maslow's hierarchy of needs at the levels of safety, love and belonging, and significance. And I've simplified Maslow's 5 levels here to 3 levels. So fundamentally, the brain stem, what McLean called the reptilian brain, is really the brain's first priority is safety first. It's the most powerful. All the senses feed through, you know, the brain stem, and then before it feeds up. And so your brain is safety first. And the moment you match for anything unsafe, you will go into your fight and flight responses even before you know you do. And it's very fast and very reactive. And then as we feel safe, we can emerge and more fully integrate our love and belonging circuits. And then from that platform of love and belonging circuits, when we engage over here, we're able to fully leverage our prefrontal cortex that integrates all levels below it. We're able to act with high performance conscious leadership. Because if you think about what the functions of the prefrontal cortex as it maps into high performance conscious leadership, this is a place in our brain where we have the capacity for emotional regulation. So we can be stressed out, but we can actually pause before we react. This is also the place where we have a highway of fibers coming up from gut intelligence, heart intelligence, feeding forward into our brain, where this feeds into our capacity for social awareness, emotional and cognitive empathy, morality. So this gives us the ability to relate well to others. In addition, this is the seat of our executive function. So when we're talking about envisioning, strategy, decision-making, this is the part of the brain that enables us to really achieve and manifest a vision and actually manifest the results we want to see in alignment with that vision. And then this is a part of the brain that actually gives us the capacity, a major part of the brain that gives us the capacity for mindfulness, where we can step back and watch the stream of our thoughts and say, hey, there goes a damn crazy thought. Perhaps I won't act on that one. So this gives us the ability to pause again and act with wisdom. So if you look at the architecture of the brain, down below, we're looking at fast reactive. And then at the top of the brain, this is much slower, slow wise, where you can put yourself into a creative mindset. So we continually oscillate between a reactive and a creative mindset. Now there's another very important dot, you know, as we're connecting a number of dots over here. And that is that we oscillate between, you know, this flow down into safety or flow up into creativity. There are flows that move in the brain. Sometimes, you know, in the world of appreciative inquiry, we talk about the flow of depreciation and then the flow of appreciation. And so there's a formula, an important formula that dictates whether or not which way that flow is going to move. And the flow, the formula is, what is the relationship of the demands we're experiencing in our lives to the resources we have to engage? And when demands exceed resources, we naturally go down into a threat response, into reacting. We become threatened by stress and self-doubt. And so we move down into a fight and flight. We react in a fight and flight response. Now, when we are responding to physical danger, that can be very appropriate. So reactivity is also important because it's there to save our lives. It's designed to save our lives. So when it comes to this physical danger, let's say coronavirus contagion, yes, it's very adaptive that we need to be hypervigilant. It is also adaptive that we need to really be very much more, thoughtful about our economic security, providing for ourselves and our family. And it's very understandable that becomes activated. We can become very activated in that side. But the brain's first primer being safety. Safety is a sledgehammer. So, your brain, its first primer is not for joy or meaning or happiness. It's safety first. And so this part of the brain is almost scorched earth. So as much as it's keeping us safe, it can sometimes be a sledgehammer, particularly around psychological threats. The psychological threats of stress and self-doubt, where that can lead us to, the threat around stress can lead us to fighting for control and taking flight from anything that leaves us feeling out of control. The threat against self-doubt can put you into a place of fighting to prove your self-worth and taking flight from anything that triggers self-doubt. And that can strain and fragment relationships. That can really tear at the fabric, not only of your one-on-one relationships, but that can tear at the fabric of society in very, very painful ways. And so this flow down into reactivity is especially strong now, particularly in this COVID time, when you're thinking about, you had mentioned early on, we already had high demands in our life. Many of us felt strained for resources at the best of times. In healthcare, 50% of healthcare providers, even before COVID, were burnt out. They had symptoms of burnout. Now you add this layer of, COVID disease that is leading to incredible disruption and disorientation, and is creating economic devastation that is disproportionate. It's disproportionate. So the demands are disproportionate as well, fragmenting resources. And it's understandable that many people are already, feeling, an incredible sense of demand on their life. And then what Peter Drucker, who's a management guru, said, even at the best of times, the gravitational pull towards safety, because these are the strongest circuits in our brain, is so powerful that we naturally have, at the best of times, we have this gravitational pull towards safety. And so he says, all organizations are a mix of friction, confusion, and low performance. Everything else requires leadership. Everything else requires leadership, because there's an entropic pull towards that. So everything else requires leadership. And what does leadership look like? So let me just talk about the consequences of what some of you may be experiencing with that entropic pull, particularly with you know, these stresses going on for weeks, months, years, or even centuries, what it can leave us feeling when we're moving down, Daniel Goleman calls this amygdala hijack. What you could land up feeling over time is just exhausted at the level of safety. When we forego love and belonging with amygdala hijack, we can begin to feel disconnected, or even marginalized. And we forego what gives us a sense of significance, we can have a reduced sense of accomplishment. Those three areas, exhaustion, disconnection, and a reduced sense of accomplishment, that's the gold standard definition of burnout. Exhaustion, disconnection, and a reduced sense of accomplishment. And, you know, as I said, in healthcare, burnout is epidemic. Burnout is epidemic. And now you're actually looking at, for the healthcare providers that is toiling right now in COVID, the demands and the resource strain that they're experiencing ultimately is going to understandably intensify burnout. And the only reason, you know, if you're one of the, you know, if you're feeling any of the strains of burnout for whatever your reasons, I just want to reassure you that you're not weak and you're not flawed. This is the way your brain, is designed to respond at levels of high demand, scant resources, in its endeavor to actually do its best to protect itself. That's the consequence.
So Danny, right there, like, so that's, I've heard this before too, and I probably heard it from you, but the idea that when you're experiencing burnout, it is your brain working against you because it's designed to sledgehammer for safety first. Yes. So you've got these things happening, your brain's doing this. Now, so you're helping describe the way the brain works and the patterns that it will naturally go through because of how it's built. And we are decades beyond learning about adult development, knowing about the neuroscience, and there's this sense of we need to be more ready to deal with how our brain works so that we don't get trapped in burnout, so that we don't stay in reactivity, psychological, emotional reactivity, when we need to be operating in a more productive state, a more resourceful state. We need to be able to have done the work so that we're more ready and we are more resource plentiful, resource abundant to deal with the demands that are just going to come faster with more complexity. So, you know, often people will say in the innovation space or the change space, people say, well, you know, change is hard, innovation's hard. And you just described a minute ago too that, well, it isn't that is an attribute of change or of innovation or complexity, right? It's a relative comparison of the two things, the demands and the resources.
Right.
And if we have the ability to prepare and ready our resources in a way that we can be more effective in the face of all the change, well, that's the work to be done then, right?
Yes. And this is a function of leadership. You know, so what Drucker said, he says everything else requires leadership. So a leader, a high performance conscious leader, has the skills and capacity to move into a path of purpose and inspiration and purpose to engage a creative mindset. And they have the capacity, these leaders have the capacity first and foremost to create a greater sense of psychological safety within themselves, to create a greater sense of connectedness within themselves, to be able to stay focused on what really matters most, and then invest deeply in creating psychological safety in their teams and communities and society at large, creating greater equality and facilitating a greater commitment to creating love and belonging for all, and helping to work in the stream of communal capital, if you will, to work in the stream of communal purpose, to elevate, to be part of something, the good that's larger than ourselves, to be part of the common good.
I'm with you. This is kind of the essence of the most powerful leverage we have as leaders. And the construct is really helping connect it all for me. So the question then, Danny, that's the work to be done. How do we do it? How do we get ourselves into a place where we are better, more effective at managing the kind of recovering from reactivity more quickly to more often be in that place of creativity and to move the conversation forward, to move the outcomes forward? How do we do it?
Yeah. So first of all, what we're asking is, how do we get to a place where resources can exceed the demand so we can rise to the challenge? So the first thing is about leading well from within is, how do we become more internally resourceful? And how do we streamline demands, unnecessary demands in our life? And then at a systemic level, how do we actually remove systemic demands and resource and provide equal resources so we can all rise to the challenges of life together? And so the foundation of this is, first of all, mindful awareness. It's mindful awareness. And when I talk about mindfulness, and there's mindfulness at the internal level where you are become self-aware, and then there are mindfulness at the environmental level where you actually become systems aware. Starting with actually, mindfulness, and the mindfulness, where I define mindfulness is a practice of paying attention. So being able to put yourself into your observing self, so you can actually see the landscape of your thoughts, inner thoughts, sensations, and emotions. And then, almost like mindfulness is a practice of paying attention, like a set of lenses, in bringing in the qualities of openness, kindness, and curiosity for what's ever arising in the present moment. So mindfulness is the practice of paying attention with a sense of openness, kindness, and curiosity for whatever is arising in the present moment. And those qualities are vital. Those qualities are vital because ultimately, to do the deep inner work, a lot of times we actually create a sense of resistance because we don't want to look, we don't want to accept, we don't want to kind of deal with the reality of what is, and we push it away, and it intensifies the lack of safety. So the ability for us to kind of like engage with openness and say, I would prefer this would not be, but I can stand in the presence of what is, so I can meet what is, actually gives us a deeper sense of safety to do meaningful work. The kindness is crucial because it helps us claim the love and belonging frame, first within ourselves, with self-compassion. If we're struggling with immense self-criticism or shame, the function of that in its most adaptive piece is it facilitates learning, but the shame can actually turn us away. So it's the self-compassion, it's the ability to hold yourself with kindness and self-compassion that enables you to do your deeper work. And then the curiosity, particularly in terms of what is it that I'm here to learn? How can I better connect with myself? How can I better connect with all of my stakeholders? How can I better connect with everybody? How can I better connect with my deeper source of inspiration? And how can I best express myself? And what's my greatest service? That ultimately is the most powerful way of actually elevating. It's changing the internal conversation to coming up with a better question. So that's the foundation. That's the foundation. You know, mindful self-awareness with the qualities of openness, kindness, and curiosity is the foundation. On that foundation, I've shared, and I know you're familiar with, I have a 4-step framework in Leading Well from Within. It's called the 4 in 4 Framework to Engage Conscious Leadership. And the first 2 steps are about essentially navigating stress, uncertainty, and self-doubt. Step 3 is all about focusing what really matters most. And step 4 is learning about how to change your internal conversation to catalyze learning and growth.
I mean, often when we work with leaders and ourselves doing the work, our first reaction to noticing that we're not behaving in a way that's congruent with the higher purpose and core values is that reactive feeling of shame, disappointment,
yes,
whatever it is, which makes us want to stop noticing where we're having that incongruency. So we eject from the practice of noticing, and rather than beating ourselves up, building ourselves up, celebrating the noticing, going, now I can choose to do something different. So, and when I hear you say that, I think, well, that's what experimentation is. I want to keep asking myself better questions and test something and learn from it, test something and learn from it, and keep enjoying that process of experimentation for the sake of learning and expanding all of those resources that you're helping me kind of, practice with so that I can be more ready.
Yes. So what you're talking about is fundamentally learning and transformation in the stream of elevation, And there is a very powerful construct. And what it's called an active learning cycle. And so if you were to ask yourself, what is the most powerful skill to facilitate learning and growth? You might want to think about that question. What is the most important skill that would support your learning and growth? What I'd offer you is the most important skill to support learning and growth is learning how to learn more effectively. So ultimately, this is a meta process that really helps us learn individually, or learn in teams, or learn in communities and society at large. And the active learning cycle has 3 components to it. And the first component is content or experience. So this might be any content you expose to, or it's an experience that you're having. And while that's necessary for change, that is insufficient for change. That's necessary for change, but that's insufficient for change because content or experience alone doesn't create change. And the evidence for that is history repeats itself. What does create change effectively is parts 2 and part 3 of the active learning cycle. And this next part is crucial. And that is content and change content or experience alone doesn't create change. It is the digestion or the metabolism of the content and experience in high quality reflection. It's the ability to ask questions. And so it's the ability to lean in to the content or experience, again, with openness, kindness, and curiosity, to be able to dig deeper, to be able to dig deeper and ask myself, you know, what is it that I'm here to learn? What is it that I'm here to learn? And what is the needed learning that I could engage in and transformation I can go through? What do I need to let go of? What do I need to embrace? What do I need to engage anew to create meaningful change? And then to create meaningful change, that high quality reflection and the insights that emanate from that needs to lead to effective action. Needs to lead to effective action. And that action loops back into a new experience. And this is not a closed loop. This is not a closed loop. This is a spiral of experience, reflection, action, experience, reflection, action, experience, reflection, action. That's the upward spiral of learning and growth. It's an upward spiral. When we're open and honest with ourselves internally, when we're able to lean in and gain insights that actually deepen our development. And then we can actually become experts in each of these three components. For this learning arc that we're on in our lives, whatever that learning arc may be, you may want to become much more discerning about what is the content or experiences you want to expose yourself to. Next, in the reflection piece, to be able to become an expert in asking good questions, to become an expert in asking good questions internally. And then if you're going to reflect collectively, to choreograph internal and external conversations that are elevating. And this is where, for example, the field of appreciative inquiry is incredibly, has got a very significant contribution, a really significant contribution. There are 6 foundational questions in this, you know, discover, dream, design, and deploy cycle. And these 6 foundational questions are, what are the outcomes? What are the outcomes that matter most to me and others, and why? Why is that important? Why is that important to me? Why is that important to my family? Why might that be important to my organization? Why that might be important to my community? And why would that be important to the way I show up in the world at large? So you might actually have a question over here when you're looking, and let's say you're reflecting on the question, how can I become more resilient at this time of immense change? How can I become more resilient in this time of immense change? And then you reflect, you know, why would that be important to me and others? You know, as we're moving, pivoting to what's next, why is that important? And then you go into the next question of discovery, which is it's unlocking and awakening strengths. So appreciative inquiry is reflecting on, essentially it's the best of what was, is, and could be. So now you ask the question, where have I ever been up against it before? We're asking a question into the past. Where have we ever been up against it before, where things have come off the rails, for where we've not had any playbook, and I came through stronger. I came through more resilient as a result. What does that reveal to me about the current strengths that I have? Reflect on, what does that reveal to me about my current strength? And if I can imagine and dream of those current strengths flourishing The next question might be, what would I be celebrating 6 months from now? Or what would we collectively as a team be celebrating if we're thinking about, talking about how we become a more resilient team? And then you're asking, what strategies could we deploy? What strategies could we deploy to make that happen? So that's an example of, and you could put around any topic, you can curate powerful questions, become an expert in asking powerful questions. And by the way, if you can't think of a question to ask, sometimes the most powerful question you can ask is, what is the most powerful question I can ask? Right. And then moving into action, finding the courage to take action, finding the courage, the self-accountability, the discipline, the support you need to take effective action that then leads into a new experience. And what we're doing by asking the questions, if we curate in the questions, how do we become a more conscious and effective leader? How do we become more resilient in these times? Right now, we're in a time where this is a time of opportunity where we can make our marks as leaders, because many people are going into a state of reactivity, If we're asking effective questions within ourselves, how do we rise as leaders? How do we rise in conscious? How do we strengthen our capacity for consciously? How do we strengthen our resiliency to do that? Where everybody's rising, we're building our internal resources to be able to kind of rise to the demands in our life and to actually help others rise too. And interesting enough, as we do this work right now, and let's say strengthen our resiliency strengths, that question in appreciative inquiry, where have we been through this before? And what does that reveal to us about our current strengths? When we ask that question 5 years from now, we'll be looking at this time of COVID and unrest and say, how did we show up now? So that will actually inoculate us against future crises. It's incredibly powerful in the sense of how we rise together. Ability to actually become more aware individually of, and in fact, one of the most powerful questions we can ask ourselves as leaders at this time is this question, understanding that this flow is a flow regulated by demands and resources. One of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself is, am I showing up right now as a demand as a leader, or am I showing up as a resource?
Yeah, am I giving energy or taking energy? Yeah.
Yes. Am I showing up as a demand on my family, my team, my organization, or my community, or society at large? Am I showing up as a demand on many segments of society, or am I showing up as a resource to create greater psychological safety, connectedness, to empower people to rise with meaningful purpose in their lives and contribute? I want to also, but it's also getting into this realm of coaching. When you're asking, what is the philosophy of coaching, or even peer coaching? If you're leading other people, and serving as a coach for other people, the temptation is to give answers. Or give advice. And sometimes people are asking for advice. The premise of, I believe, the most effective coaching is you're an effective coach if you can effectively self-coach, help others self-coach themselves. And you know that you've got the reps, the frame of this. The reason why I'm giving you the context, the higher the altitude, the greater the leverage. I'm giving you a high meta frame on this question. If your intent is to help support somebody to self-coach themselves, you will show up in a different way for them in the way you encourage their reps, right? And so in my coaching, what happens is I've got standing calls, every 2 weeks on this arc of leading well from within and mastery of conscious leadership. But I'm on call 24/7 for my clients. I'm on call 24/7 because the real value of doing a rep is in the heat of the moment. So it's not theoretical, it's practical. And so what happens is when my clients call me in a moment of duress, I know what's happening is the demands in their lives are outstripping their resources to engage. So they've plummeted into safety. And so this coaching model, if you will, which is a Maslowian coaching model that I want to share with you, because if you can use this with your team, with your family, in your community, in terms of how do you help and support the rise of others, the first thing is to know that this is not about giving advice, because I know when somebody's coming to me and their demands are exceeding their resources, literally what I know, and these can be very smart leaders, that they have great compassion and decision-making capacity, just that I know in that moment, when demands have exceeded resources, they've gone limbic and they don't have any access to their prefrontal cortex, just in the heat of the moment. And so my goal, and I know they're calling me as a peripheral prefrontal cortex to be able to resource up to meet the challenge. But my goal is to help them bring their prefrontal cortex back online. That's essential. I want to actually strengthen the capacity to bring their prefrontal cortex. So the sequence is this. The first thing I do is I listen with empathy and compassion. And what that feels like and what that looks like, I'm not affirming when if they're railing and saying, can you believe this person did this and that and that? I'm not affirming any of that. What I'm affirming is suffering. I'm saying I can really appreciate how painful this experience is for you. And when somebody begins to share their story, they're no longer in their story. They're rising above their story. And what happens is, inevitably, the stress level comes down. It might have started out at 13 out of 10. And then maybe it comes down to, kind of like 7 out of 10. So it's not completely, so the point is, I don't try to claim the ground of significance until I've claimed the ground and belonging in this Maslowian elevation, right? So it's so important. And then what I sometimes do is, I know, Raf, in your language, you would call it like, a little ninja move. And that is, I'll ask a couple of weird questions, because I want them to actually kind of flex some reps on this. I would say, how are you feeling? And then, say, well, wow, I feel like I've had a weight lifted off my shoulder. So I know that you can feel the energy shift in the call. And I know that we've claimed some ground, but before I move on, I want to kind of consolidate something. And I ask them these two weird questions to consolidate the love and belonging frame. I ask, have you felt me being compassionate with you right now? It's like a weird question, right?
Yeah.
It's a weird question. And the reason why I ask this question is not looking for my own feedback. They'll inevitably say yes, because my style's compassionate, and they will say yes. But then I follow that up with an even weirder question. I ask them, how do you know? How do you know? And they'll say something like, I'm hearing you speak with warm, affirming words. I'm feeling the kindness in the tone of your voice and in the affirming words you use. And the reason why I'm doing that is that we are bred for compassion towards others, but we actually are not bred for self-compassion. Most of us. So what I'm doing is I'm modeling compassion so they can internalize that as self-compassion, to work that rep. So what I then say is I say, next time you're actually under this degree of stress, what would it look like if you use that same kind of warm, affirming tone as if you were talking to your best friend?
Use it with yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So ultimately what I'm doing is I'm using that process in the opportune time, because there are practices that you can actually use to strengthen self-compassion at baseline. But this is an awakening of self-compassion in the heat of the moment. I'm awakening self-compassion in the heat of the moment. And then they say like, okay, yeah, that would feel good. That would feel good. And then I move now to the active learning cycle in the reflection that claims the ground of significance. We elevate to the ground of significance, the frame of significance. Elevate. And I, again, would use any number of those 6 foundational questions and others, but those 6 foundational questions can serve incredibly well. And where I've asked, what are the outcomes that matter most to you right now? What are the outcomes that matter most to you right now? And why does this outcome matter to you so much? So we're actually anchoring, and so I'm not giving them advice. I'm asking them for an awakening of their purposeful outcomes that they want to see for themselves. And then I ask them a question. I go back into that question of history. Where have you been successful with this before? Where have you already been successful with this before? Or where have you seen this done well? And what does that reveal to you, moving into the present? What does that reveal to you about the current strengths you have, or the values, or the guiding principles that would help you get closer to where you want to go? And then we'd look at, say, I want to really have them embody that. Now, connecting with the strengths and values, imagining yourself. So we're actually doing some dreaming, imagining yourself dreaming. What would you be celebrating 2 weeks from now, or 3 months from now, or 6 months from now, whatever the time frame is that makes sense? What would you be celebrating in terms of, the outcome? What does it look like? And then we go into, okay, what strategies can you implement, or what are the smallest action steps you can take?
Baby steps.
Smallest, minimal viable product.
Yeah.
What is the smallest steps you can take to put yourself on the path of achieving that vision of success? And then the last part about that, now they own it. Now they own it. They own it. And then you might say, and what are the resources you need, and how can I best support you with that? But you're doing that in the context of their ownership. And so essentially what you're doing when you're talking about the reps is the combination of actually deepening self-awareness with openness, kindness, and curiosity, with empowering others to claim a greater depth of their self-compassion, and then the curiosity with well-structured personal reflection for self-coaching. You're actually providing them more than an answer to their challenge. You're providing them with the reps for effective learning and transformation, the heart of which is mindful self-awareness again, openness, kindness, curiosity, self-compassion, and high-quality questions that put you into the pathway of catalyzing growth and transformation.
Right on. The high-quality rep is building the new thinking patterns that go through the clarity of that VSIR process, right?
Yes.
Vision, the strategy, the implementation, and the results, and just keep going.
Yes.
Those are the high-quality reps in the context of what's happening, the relevant context of what's happening, whether it's business, personal, whatever.
Exactly. And I love, Rep, what I love about what you just alluded to is these are, what we've shared right now are skills and tools for kind of working, the reps. But this is not the curriculum. And what I mean by, what I like to say sometimes is the curriculum is not on the slide deck. The curriculum is what's on deck. So life is the curriculum, particularly the areas of greatest challenge presents the greatest learning growth opportunities. And these are the skills and tools that enable you to work life's curriculum more effectively.
Right. Yeah. And so I mean, that's the work to be done, right? It's to be in some deliberate practice to keep focusing on improving the way we think through those things so that we can recover from reactivity and be in creativity more often. Whatever word you want to use, right? But that's the rep.
And that actually gets at the power of self-coaching, because when we're actually using these challenging moments, essentially each of these challenging moments is giving you the capacity to strengthen your self-coaching. Theoretically, every touch of coaching should release any dependency on coaching. Where coaching is not a need, but it's a choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the flow here and just even, I love the metaphor, the innovation metaphors of and lean startup, whatever, the MVP, like this idea of, just keep doing that. That's a treasure hunt. And the more we go on that treasure hunt, the more capable we are to deal with life and whatever it brings us. The curriculum is how and when we practice. We don't wait till the curriculum calms down. Like we don't wait till the dust settles. That's when we get the highest quality reps.
It is an infinite curriculum. Yeah. Because if you put this into the learning cycle, it's an infinite curriculum where you can have experiences that go brilliantly, or you can have experiences that you initially perceive as a disaster.
Right.
Okay. Either way, you can put that into the learning curriculum. You can, and that's why there's never anything short to actually unpack in coaching, because it's an infinite curriculum. So if somebody says, what was your most powerful experiences over the last week? Sometimes they will share some amazing things that happened. Sometimes they will actually share heartbreaking things that happened. Either way, when things are great, what were your insights around why that went so well?
Yeah.
What was your insights around why that went so well? Or if things broke, what were your insights around why that happened? What were your insights? And what can you learn from that? What can you discover of the capacities you already have to surmount that next time? So
both are experiments for learning. Yeah.
All experiments for learning. So it's an infinite curriculum.
Love it. So one of the metaphors we've been using together, and it connects to the picture behind you even, right? I know you're a big surfer out there in California on the West Coast, and you're a literal surfer. And we talk about often the idea of leaders are big wave surfers. The curriculum of life now, the we're all big wave surfers. The waves keep getting bigger and bigger.
Yes.
Waves of change and disruption. So the idea of as the waves get bigger, you also say we have to learn to surf our sympathetic. So I think I might be mixing metaphors, but
Okay.
I think about you when I do it.
Oh, I love the metaphor because my passion is surfing. So first of all, when you put yourself into a place of resistance, when you paddle out, if you resist the force of surfing, the waves that are coming, you're more likely to wipe out and get crushed by the waves. How do you effectively move with the waves? How do you surf the waves? And I want to come back. We don't only surf alone, we surf with others. I want to make sure we come back to that. So the first thing is the resistance that we experience actually creates a greater sense of danger for us. And when I'm talking about surfing the sympathetics, it's actually, it's getting into talking about the autonomic system that mediates our surfing response. So we have two parts of our autonomic nervous system, this automatic nervous system. One is our sympathetic nervous system, which drives our fight and flight behavior. And then there is the parasympathetic nervous system that taps the brake. And the way we optimize our internal physiology to actually surf well is how we orient into dealing with the stress of these waves. And typically, the definition of stress has been, can I cope? Can I cope? And if that's your definition of stress, whenever we get stressed, we feel like we're flailing around, that we can't cope in the surf, and we begin to panic with fight and flight, and we begin to avoid, we can't surf very well, we begin to actually tighten up in fight and flight. That actually sets us up. In fact, we get stressed about being stressed, and we begin to resent all the people that are triggering stress. There are researchers at Stanford that have showed that if you change the definition of your stress, you surf more effectively with the stress. And what they share is, they said stress happens when something you care about is at stake. Stress happens when something you care about is at stake. So what that means is when you get stressed, you don't get stressed because you're weak, because you can't cope. You get stressed because you care. You get stressed because you care. And you're understanding that the energy of stress, it's just simply energy, is mobilizing as an asset that energy of stress, which is actually, there are sympathetics, but it's more effectively mediated by the parasympathetics, putting you in a high internal state. Your physiology changes in this way, a high state of relaxed alertness that puts you in the best possible physiology to surf the waves. You're optimizing your internal physiology by changing your mindset around stress to appreciate how stress happens when something you care about is at stake. And now you begin to ask the question, what do I most care about? And what are the smallest steps I can take in service of how can I leverage that energy of stress in terms of what I most care about? So you're more likely to surf those waves well and enjoy the ride and the benefit of the travel. The other piece is, as we're moving into a time of complexity, tremendous complexity, where the waves are getting bigger. There's, another adage that in big wave surfing, you don't surf alone. You don't surf alone. Part of this is you want to find a community of surfing brothers and sisters that you can surf with as well, where you can crowdsource effective wisdom to deal with the inevitable complexity of these larger and larger waves. So you're learning your own personal skills, but you're also learning the choreography of surfing with others, where you can crowdsource that wisdom and surf well together.
Love it. Don't train alone, train together for the big waves.
Yeah.
Well, This has been our own little metaphor of surfing some big waves together. So thank you, Dr. Danny, as always.
And I really appreciate you, Raf, your commitment to not only your growth and learning, your active learning cycle is just so inspiring. Your active learning cycle is just so inspiring. And equally moving is your commitment to sharing your learning and insights with others in the way that you want to, that your heart of purpose is uplifting others. So it's an absolute joy to be over here with you today. And I so appreciate the opportunity to share with all of you listening as well.
Boom.